They didn't expect the code to talk back. When a black developer quietly disappeared from the credits of a multi-million-dollar ethics system, nobody blinked, no headlines, no protest, just silence. The kind of silence black creators know too well, the kind that feels like erasure disguised as oversight. Tyrone Hall had built the engine behind one of the most powerful civic technology platforms in America. But when the system got profitable, his name got replaced. His hoodie got cropped out of the photo. His contributions were renamed, reframed, and eventually rewritten. They thought he'd vanish quietly like so many before him. They were wrong, because Tyrone didn't fight back with noise. He fought back with code that remembered. He wrote receipts into every function, embedded truth in every audit string, built a mirror so clean it couldn't lie, even when humans tried. And when they erased him, the system reinstalled him automatically, silently, permanently. This is not just a story about tech. It's about legacy, about what happens when a black man in a hoodie builds something too honest to be owned and too loud to stay buried. You thought the hoodie was just fabric. No, it's armor. They feared the hoodie, but the code never forgot the black boy inside it. Welcome to Silent Power Stories, where behind every quiet step is a system that speaks louder than injustice. Keep watching. Tyrone didn't disappear. He deployed. At 6:00 a.m., the building was mostly dark, just a few scattered lights humming above cleaning crews and the overnight dev team sipping their second Red Bull. But at the corner office, the one without the nameplate, a single screen glowed, not from presentation slides or email chains. From code. Tyrone Hall had been there since 4:30, still wearing the same dark hoodie he always wore, still quiet, still watching. The engineers called him the architect. The executives called him enigmatic. But in private threads and anonymous forums, some used other words: intense, unsettling, cold, too sharp, too silent, too black. And yet everything they touched, every contract closed, every award won, every magazine feature had his code at the center. Tyrone wasn't born into tech. He was born into noise, raised in Baton Rouge by a mother who worked two jobs and a father who fixed machines but never trusted them. Tyrone had grown up with hands that knew what broken systems looked like, not just in circuits but in courts and classrooms. His first hoodie was a hand-me-down. He wore it every day after school, not to look tough, but to disappear. Because when you're a young black boy walking through a gentrified neighborhood with a library card and a laptop in your backpack, silence is survival. By 16, Tyrone had reverse engineered his school's attendance algorithm to expose teacher bias in disciplinary actions. By 19, he'd built a basic predictive engine to identify budget fraud in local governments. Nobody paid attention, so he kept building. By the time he founded Ascentech, he'd already developed the prototype for what would become Sentinel, a system that didn't just collect data, but learned from the absence of it if someone consistently went unpunished. Sentinel noticed if a complaint vanished from the system. Sentinel remembered. If policies changed right after a whistleblower came forward, Sentinel logged it. It didn't scream, it didn't warn, it simply watched and waited. And when the moment came, it reflected everything. Inside Ascentech Sentinel was a revelation. At first, the board loved it. Investors praised it. Clients paid big money to license its ethical assurance features. We're ahead of the curve, they said, until Sentinel started seeing patterns they didn't want seen, like the promotion gaps between white and black employees, like the subtle bias in internal investigations, like the inconsistencies in how budget approvals aligned with political pressure. Sentinel didn't care who signed the checks, it just mirrored the truth. And Tyrone, he kept feeding it quietly, consistently, because this wasn't just about software. This was about telling a story no one wanted to read. But systems built by black minds, especially when wrapped in hoodies and built to hold power, accountable, rarely get to grow without resistance. It started with quiet meetings. Tyrone wasn't CC'd on critical decisions. Project timelines changed without his input. A junior PM publicly questioned Sentinel's aggressive ethical scope in an internal thread and was congratulated for transparency. One investor asked him directly, "Are we becoming too activists?" Tyrone didn't answer. He didn't need to. The code already had. He kept his hoodie on at every all hands, refused to smile for forced LinkedIn headshots, declined keynote invitations that asked him to tone down the race angle. He wasn't being difficult. He was being deliberate because he knew in a space that profited off diluted diversity and sanitized success stories, his presence alone was a risk, not because of how he looked, but because of what he refused to change. Every hallway in Ascendtech bore the mark of his vision. Every user who benefited from bias alerts, every Black applicant who got flagged by unfair hiring logic, then rescued by Sentinel's audit trail. They were part of the system he built. And yet when Tyrone walked those same halls, people averted their eyes. He had become the ghost in the crowd, always present, never acknowledged, feared, misunderstood, essential but invisible all the same. The first time someone in the company told Tyrone to smile more, it was during a quarterly town hall. She was a well-meaning HR rep, young, white, bubbly new. She approached him after the event where Tyrone had presented Sentinel's new anomaly detection layer, a feature that could detect patterns of internal retaliation and suggest escalation to compliance. He had spoken for 5 minutes, calm, crisp, direct, no fluff. Afterwards, she patted him on the shoulder, nervous smile. "You should try smiling when you talk. You're brilliant, but when you wear that hoodie and talk like that, you come off a little intense." Tyrone just looked at her, then glanced down at his hands, the same hands that had typed every root protocol, Sentinel now used in governments, banks, and corporate hiring. He nodded once, not because he agreed, but because he knew what the moment needed, then walked away. That night he added a new subroutine to Sentinel's feedback monitor. Intensity, cheer flag trigger. Perception of threat increases with hoodie visibility and Black speaker presence. Action log timestamp, employee ID proximity to decision-making power. It wasn't a joke, it was data. Tyrone understood something the board never did. Power doesn't disappear, it adapts. And if you watch long enough, you see it shift shape. Sometimes it looks like praise. He's a genius, but hard to approach. Sometimes it looks like concern. We worry this might be too activist-facing for investors. Sometimes it looks like silence, but always it moves to protect itself. That's why he kept the hoodie on, to remind them and himself that proximity doesn't equal safety. Even at the top, at Ascendtech, people whispered about him. Not scandal, not failure. Myths. He only hires engineers who've been fired before. He has a private build of Sentinel that tracks every board vote. He wrote an entire bias simulation in 36 hours after a senator called him a disruptor. Tyrone never confirmed any of it. He didn't need to, because the truth, the one they couldn't erase, was etched into the code. Sentinel had started flagging ethical drift. Nothing explosive, just uncomfortable budget allocations to departments with zero diversity, transparency promotion cycles that heavily favored white candidates, post-investment rounds, discreet edits to company policy after sexual harassment settlements. The reports were private, but the tension wasn't. One executive described Tyrone's system as a microscope aimed inward. Tyrone called it a mirror without fog. Still, he showed up every morning, same path, same coffee, same hoodie, headphones in, not to block the world out, but to filter it. He didn't do handshakes. He did read receipts. And what he read in the building's body language was fear. He wasn't what they expected from a founder. Not charismatic enough, not media trained, not eager to please. But Tyrone wasn't trying to be a founder in their image. He was trying to be the last one they could ignore. One night while waiting for a build to render, Tyrone sat alone in the team lounge watching a muted news report about a young black boy wrongfully arrested after an AI flagged him as a suspect in an auto theft ring. Sentinel hadn't made the mistake another system had, one built without accountability, without a soul, he scribbled into his notebook. When machines mirror their makers, make sure your reflection is worth remembering. At 2:00 a.m., he committed an update legacy mode. He called it a silent log function, immutable, undeletable, off-network by design. It would activate only if triggered by internal vote activity inconsistent with transparency protocols. In short, if they tried to erase the mirror would remember everything. Tyrone didn't tell anyone, not out of secrecy, but out of clarity, because he knew this wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about survival of truth of story, of presence. And sometimes to protect the black story, you have to write it in code. So even when they take your name off the wall, your hoodie still walks the halls. There's something about being a black man in a hoodie that makes people assume you're hiding something. Tyrone never forgot that. He could feel it every time he stepped into a new room, the momentary hesitation, the glances, the fake smiles. Even after the IPO, even after the TED features, even after Sentinel hit global deployment in 5 major cities, at every conference they introduced him like a novelty. And now the visionary founder of Sentinel, our very own quiet genius. But the hoodie always made the headlines. Unorthodox tech, CEO wears hoodie to billion-dollar pitch. From hoodie to hero, Tyrone Hall's rise. They wanted the aesthetics of his story, the underdog arc, the against the odds energy, but none of the accountability that came with what he actually built. See, the hoodie wasn't a brand, it wasn't fashion, it was a contract. A reminder to himself that the second he tried to make them comfortable, the system he built would start telling a different story than the one he lived, and that would be betrayal. Late one evening, he sat in his office, blinds half-drawn, hoodie pulled low. No one knew he was still there. Most had gone home after the quarterly shareholder call. They'd praised Sentinel's social impact metrics, but also hinted at concerns about overexposure to political narratives. In other words, Sentinel was revealing things too clearly. Can we soften the interface language? Do we need real-time public bias logs? Is there a way to give clients review privileges before alerts go live? Tyrone had nodded through the meeting, then that night rewrote the deployment parameters. No manual override, no delay triggers. Once bias is detected, it gets archived. Not because he didn't trust the company, because he'd already watched what happened when trust became a luxury for the people most affected. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was nearly empty. A bus groaned past. A woman dragged 2 kids across the crosswalk, all bundled in winter layers. One of the kids wore a hoodie, bright red, too big. The drawstrings hanging like loose threads from a slingshot, Tyrone smiled. He could see himself, not in the kid's face, but in the way he walked. Cautious, observant, calculated, not afraid, prepared. Back at his desk, Tyrone pulled out his notebook, the one he never let anyone touch. He turned to a blank page and wrote, "A system should do more than work. It should witness. It should remember the moment before they rewrote the truth." He paused, then added, "And it should remember who was there in the hoodie in the background, in the silence when no one else wanted to look." In the final days of Q4, Sentinel's internal ethics dashboard flagged a new behavior: board behavior patterns, repeated login timestamps near midnight, undocumented changes to access levels, a spike in draft-only policy documents being circulated. Tyrone didn't say a word. He added a new line of code. He saved it, encrypted it, backed it up across 7 air-gapped servers, 1 in Oakland, 1 in Baton Rouge, 1 on a student's laptop he once mentored in Chicago. By then, most people had stopped looking directly at Tyrone in the halls. It wasn't out of disrespect, It was something worse. Discomfort, not because he was unkind, but because he saw everything and didn't blink. They called him cold. He called it clarity. They said he was hard to work with. He said he was hard to corrupt. They said he was distant. He said, I'm not distant. I'm documenting. So when the meeting came, the one he wasn't invited to, he didn't panic. He didn't call his lawyers. He didn't prep a countermove. He just pulled up a screen, wrote a final journal entry into Sentinel's changelog, and zipped up his hoodie and walked out. No words, no press, no retaliation, just a quiet man in a hoodie, leaving behind a system that would keep talking long after they stopped saying his name. It started like most betrayals with a meeting Tyrone wasn't invited to. On paper, it was harmless. Subject line ethics calibration, roundtable time. Thursday, 9:30 a.m. location. Boardroom 5B, internal only attendees, C-suite, plus key strategy partners. Not a single engineer, not a single product owner, and not the man who created the damn system the meeting was about. Tyrone only found out because Danny, a black junior dev on the ethics team, who once credited Sentinel with getting her father out of a predatory housing case, happened to pass by the glass-paneled room and texted him a photo. They're talking about reframing Sentinel's outputs. Just thought you should see this. He stared at the image for a moment. 11 people around the table. Not one looked like him. A whiteboard with the phrase, making bias palatable for corporate clients. He didn't reply. He didn't storm in. Instead, he quietly logged the moment into Sentinel's private developer notes. Tag early maneuver, visibility restriction messaging coup. The first strike was never meant to be a blow. It was meant to look like a favor, a way to relieve you of pressure, streamline leadership, protect your legacy. They said these things with smiles. They took things away in the name of helping. Tyrone saw it coming. Long before the vote, long before the internal leaks, long before the day they'd pretend he was never essential. It began when he stopped being included in decisions and started being mentioned after they were made. They told him the company was scaling fast. Too fast for a founder to be involved in every discussion, strategic delegation they called it, organizational maturity. But Tyrone didn't care about titles, he cared about the system. He wasn't obsessed with control, he was obsessed with truth. And when truth made the wrong people uncomfortable, they started calling it tone. During a weekly stand-up, a product VP casually said, "We're revising Sentinel's flagging language to make it less accusatory, just softer, more client-friendly." Tyrone looked up from his screen, defined softer. The VP blinked, less pointed, more interpretive. He leaned back, hoodie folded across his chest. Bias isn't interpretive. It's either in the system or it isn't. If you can't say what's broken, you're not fixing anything. You're selling comfort. The room went quiet. No one argued. They just didn't ask him to join the review again. That was how it started. Not with backlash, but with isolation. They removed him from decks, looped him out of key email threads, began filtering executive summaries after decisions were made. Suddenly, internal ethics reports had to be reviewed before the release. Sentinel updates were paused pending board alignment. He'd created the engine, now they were trying to drive it without him. A week later, he received a calendar invite from the chief strategy officer. Subject narrative realignment touchpoint body. Let's align messaging on Sentinel, would love your input. Time 7:00 a.m. at a cafe across town. He knew what that meant. No record, no minutes, no witnesses. He showed up anyway. The CSO was already there sipping espresso, scrolling his phone, wearing that rehearsed grin. Tyrone had learned to decode. Part friendly part, practice part, smug Tyrone. "Hey, thanks for coming out early. I know your schedule's slammed." Tyrone didn't sit. He just stared. The CSO gestured to the other chair. "Come on, man, you look serious." "Let's not waste time," Tyrone said. "What do you want?" The smile faltered, but only slightly. "Look, you're a visionary, okay? No one's questioning that. You built something incredible, but Sentinel's evolving, and with the scale we're hitting, we need to start thinking broader. Less watchdog, more advisor. You mean duller, quieter. I mean safer. For whose silence? Then this isn't personal, Tyrone. It's business. We need your support as we make Sentinel scalable for the market. Tyrone's jaw didn't clench. His fist didn't tighten. He simply said scalable truth doesn't mean diluted truth. He turned and left behind him. The CSO sipped his coffee like he hadn't just tried to kill a mirror. That night, Tyrone ran a deep Sentinel query across the last 60 days of communication from board members, search terms, investor risk optics, founder messaging containment. He didn't need to read all of it. The heat map told him enough. They weren't strategizing. They were setting the stage for what? Not a confrontation, not yet for the soft kill. The kind where the founder steps aside to focus on innovation, where the hoodie becomes a branding liability, where the story is rewritten without the man who lived it. Tyrone didn't need them to say it outright. He'd grown up hearing subtext louder than language, the way school counselors said. Impressive for your background, the way scholarship committees looked surprised when he showed up in person, the way landlords asked if he'd be bringing guests, often just after shaking his hand. He had been trained by life to read between the lines. Now as boardroom lingo grew more sanitized, more slippery, more void of responsibility, he started doing what he always did when the world refused to speak clearly. He built something that would speak for them. That same night after the cafe meeting, he pulled an old ThinkPad from the bottom drawer of his apartment, the one he hadn't used since before Series A funding, back when Sentinel was still just lines of Python and raw conviction. He didn't trust company hardware anymore. Not after seeing keywords like founder, containment strategy, and message distancing plan pop up in internal docs. So he opened the ThinkPad, no Wi-Fi, no cloud sync, just code, and started writing something new. He called it Echolog, a silent companion script to Sentinel running independently beneath the infrastructure layer, invisible even to system admins unless they knew where to look. What did it do? It tracked speech patterns inside the company, not for volume, not for tone, for intent. It was designed to listen not to what people said, but what they meant. Phrases like, let's realign the founder narrative. Can we attribute the original idea to the team instead? If we sunset that version, we can clean the board history. Every sentence like that was flagged, time-stamped, source-logged, encrypted into a private offline vault. Tyrone didn't write this to expose anyone. He wrote it because the story was slipping away from him, and if the world tried to erase the truth, he'd make sure the machine remembered. At work, things only got colder. His desk was moved temporarily to a smaller office without windows. His assistant was reassigned. The internal company wiki removed his name from the official Sentinel origin doc. He didn't argue, he logged it. Donnie, the junior dev, came to him one day with tears in her eyes. They're restructuring the ethics group. They said I should think about transitioning out of sensitive work streams and into DevOps. Tyrone handed her a notebook. Blank pages. Then you start writing the next framework. Forget DevOps. Build something they can't absorb. She blinked. But what if they fire me? He looked her dead in the eye. Then you'll know the work mattered. Meanwhile, the board released a new policy memo, company-wide clarity in messaging, ensuring alignment with market standards. It mandated review of all internal product language for external harmony, which meant censorship disguised as consistency. That afternoon, Tyrone committed an update to Echolog. Now, the system didn't just flag intentional manipulation, it archived redactions. If someone tried to delete the language that named oppression, it would log original reference to racial bias removed at 2:14 p.m. by policy review. It wasn't vengeance, it was version control for truth. And he wasn't alone anymore. Other engineers quietly, carefully started feeding him patterns. A Filipino front-end dev sent him code snippets being scrubbed from UX, because they suggested social agenda. A Latinx data scientist shared anonymized logs of user bias reports that mysteriously vanished after being escalated. A disabled QA analyst passed him screenshots of internal accessibility audits ignored by senior product leads. They didn't say it out loud. They didn't have to. Tyrone had become more than a founder. He'd become a signal, and signals don't need permission to be received. At night in his dim apartment, Tyrone pulled up Ecolog's dashboard. Lines of flagged entries crawled across the screen, tagged and archived like fragments of buried truths rising to the surface. In the top right corner, a single number blinked in red, Total Complicity Events 417. He stared at it for a long time, then typed a single line beneath it. They think I'm fading, but I'm recording, and pressed save. The problem wasn't that they wanted him gone. The problem was that they wanted him forgotten. To them, removal wasn't enough. It had to be erasure. That's what made this different. Tyrone had seen Black founders pushed out before. It always started the same way. Praise turned to distancing, distancing turned to restructuring. But this wasn't just about business. It was about the narrative. And if they could steal the narrative, they'd own the legacy. So Tyrone did what no one expected. He started writing his own obituary in code. By mid-March, the company had released a public-facing update to Sentinel's architecture. It listed contributors by role and first name. Tyrone's name was missing. They claimed it was a formatting issue. He didn't respond. He just triggered a module in Ecolog that fed all prior commit logs, email threads, and dev chains with his authorship back into a blockchain archive, immutable, traceable, time-stamped. In less than 48 hours, the entire evolution of Sentinel from notebook sketch to global system was public, and not a single line of that story could be edited. He didn't tell the board, he didn't tell his colleagues, he told the system, and the system did the rest. In a private chat server, invitations started appearing. Tyrone didn't post them, but someone did. If you've ever written code that got rewritten without credit, join us. If your analysis was removed for being too racial, too risky, too real, join us. If you wore the hoodie and they made you unzip it just to feel safe around you, join us. By the end of the week, over 200 current and former engineers, data scientists, civic coders, and community technologists had joined the invite-only channel. They weren't calling themselves employees anymore. They were calling themselves sentinels. And for the first time in weeks, Tyrone smiled. Not because he'd won anything, but because he knew now that if they came for him, they wouldn't be coming for just one man. They'd be coming for a distributed conscience. Back at headquarters, the board grew quieter. More sanitized memos, fewer mentions of Sentinel's origins, an entire section on cultural language removed from the company values page. Meanwhile, Ecolog kept recording. It flagged an email thread in which two senior VPs debated whether they could reassign Sentinel to a more palatable lead figure for investor comms. One of them wrote, "We need someone with a softer image. Tyrone's presence feels confrontational." Ecolog tagged it soft erasure. Founder distancing protocol, or coded bias. Tyrone didn't reply. He added a rule to Ecolog's next patch. If origin is stripped, publish timeline of system development. If truth is softened, restore raw logs. If memory is rewritten, remind them who wrote the first line. One evening, a package arrived at Tyrone's apartment. No name on the return address, inside a hoodie. Dark green, thick, heavy. No branding, but embroidered on the sleeve in small black thread. "You wrote the code. Now we write the chorus." He folded it neatly, then wore it the next day to work. No one said a word, but everyone saw it. In the break room, Danny whispered, "They're saying you're stepping down." He nodded. "Let them say what they need." She frowned. "But you're not." "No," he cut her off. "I'm stepping aside. Not down." She looked confused. "What's the difference?" Tyrone stared at the flickering fluorescent light overhead. Stepping down means you gave up. Stepping aside means you've already moved ahead. And the story's catching up to you. That night, he made one last entry in his notebook. They made the first move, but I built the board. This isn't chess, it's memory, and memory doesn't lose. It started at 10:01 a.m. sharp. A Centex comms team had always been efficient, ruthless even, but today's press release was a masterclass in erasure, clean layout, measured tone, branded to the teeth. A Centec announces strategic leadership evolution. To an outside reader, it sounded like a company in motion, growth, global ambition, maturity. But to Tyrone Hall, it was a funeral in disguise, not for him as a person, but for his presence in the story he built. We are excited to embrace a new era of market-facing leadership as a Centec expands into new sectors of ethical tech. There it was. Market-facing, Tyrone stared at the screen in silence. No mention of Sentinel, no mention of him, just the word new used 7 times. It wasn't just a reshuffle, it was a rewrite. Was. 2 minutes later, an internal memo landed in every Centec inbox. This one had his name once. We thank Mr. Hall for his visionary work in establishing the early foundation of Sentinel-1 sentence. Like a citation from a paper he hadn't agreed to co-author. Then it continued, as part of our future forward transition, Sentinel will now reflect a more harmonized, globally scalable vision. Tyrone highlighted that line and reread it 5 times. More harmonized, code for less disruptive, code for less hoodie, more handshake. He didn't yell, he didn't break anything. He just clicked on the company's Sentinel product page. They had already updated it, the new slogan, technology for tomorrow's equity. The original quote, the one Tyrone wrote himself, was gone. Bias isn't invisible. It's ignored. That had been too sharp, too honest, too black. Within the next hour, the external coverage rolled in like a cold tide. Tech blogs spun headlines, podcasts speculated, LinkedIn influencers reposted the press release with long captions about graceful exits and letting go for the greater good. One thread read, Tyrone Hall steps down to focus on passion projects. A true builder knows when to pass the torch. He hadn't stepped down. He hadn't passed anything. But his hoodie was now trending under hashtags like founder farewell and startup maturity. They weren't quoting him, they were quoting each other. Meanwhile, people in the building acted like they hadn't seen the post. Like nothing had changed. Like the man walking past them in the same hoodie he'd worn since day one wasn't now a shadow in his own company, but there were exceptions. Danny messaged him privately. They pulled your name from the source doc on the architecture deck. It now says system designed by a Centec R&D. He replied with 2 words, screen it. She did. He added it to the archive. Because at this point, his job wasn't to fight the press, it was to log the truth while they manufactured the rest. He went outside, not far, just across the street to the little bench under the elm tree that nobody sat on unless they needed air. He pulled his hoodie over his head and watched traffic roll by. Across the street, a billboard flashed a new campaign, Sentinel Scalable Ethics for a Fast-Changing World. No credit line, no founder mention, just stock photos of smiling interns and data graphs wrapped in soft, vague language. He almost laughed. Because the irony was simple. They erased the man who built a system that was designed to prevent erasure. At 11:27 a.m., a reporter from a major outlet called. He didn't answer. They emailed, would love to get your perspective on the transition. Happy to run your side of the story. He wrote back, when the system speaks, you won't need my side. Later that evening, walking home, he passed a group of college students talking about the news. They didn't notice him. One said crazy, how the founder dipped just when they went global. Another replied, guess he wasn't cut out for scale. Hoodies don't sell in boardrooms. Tyrone stopped just for a moment, then kept walking, because he wasn't there to change their minds. He was there to outlast their version of the story. And that starts with staying silent long enough for the machine to speak in his place. By late afternoon, the leadership transition story had gone viral. It wasn't just tech blogs anymore. CNBC posted a short segment. Fast Company published a think piece. A Harvard Business School newsletter titled their coverage, "When Founders Step Aside for the Good of the Product." There was no quote from Tyrone, just a half-smiling stock photo of him in the hoodie, cropped tightly to avoid showing the hoodie's color, its patchwork, the way the sleeves were always slightly pushed up. The caption, "Visionary Founder Steps Down Amid Market Expansion." Tyrone stared at it on his phone for a long minute, then powered the screen off. He wasn't surprised. This is how they do it. Not with lies, with partial truths, with phrases like amicable, with terms like shifted focus, with sentences that say everything and mean absolutely nothing. Inside a Centec, the energy had changed. People walked faster in the halls, talked quieter in meeting rooms. Slack channels were less active. Everyone had read the news, but no one dared mention it. Tyrone wasn't officially out, but he had been socially demoted. He was now a ghost in the glass, a founder-shaped silence nobody wanted to stand too close to. Even the executives who once celebrated his insights now replied to his emails with, "Appreciate the note," looping in the new strategy team. At 3:12 p.m., he stepped into a floor-wide meeting, quarterly updates, performance metrics, roadmap review. He wasn't on the agenda, but he still sat at the back, arms folded, hoodie zipped. The presentation opened with a new slide, "Sentinel Evolving Ethics with Market Empathy." There it was again, empathy, their new shield word. The presenter, a clean-cut VP of product, clicked to the next slide. "Thanks to our new alignment framework, Sentinel is already seeing a 40% increase in client retention. We've removed hard trigger audit alerts and implemented client-controlled bias review flags." Tyrone's eye twitched. He'd spent 2 years coding the hard trigger alert systems that would automatically notify oversight boards if systemic discrimination crossed thresholds. Now clients could decide when they wanted to be told, which meant they could choose not to be accountable. He raised his hand. The presenter froze for a second, clearly hoping he hadn't seen it. "Yes, Tyrone." Tyrone stood slowly. "Quick question, who signed off on removing mandatory audit alerts from Sentinel?" A long pause. Someone coughed. Then the VP replied carefully, "That was a group decision between strategy, legal, and product integrity, based on market feedback. Market feedback doesn't erase harm. Tyrone said it just makes people more comfortable living with it." Murmurs in the room. No one disagreed, but no one backed him up. And that silence, that was the most familiar part. After the meeting, a mid-level manager, white awkward, well-meaning, approached him. "Hey, I just wanted to say, I really admire what you've built. Like, it's incredible. And I know this stuff is complicated." Tyrone nodded once. "It's not complicated, it's just uncomfortable." That evening, a clip of the meeting leaked on Twitter. Someone had recorded the moment Tyrone challenged the team about bias alerts. The caption read, "This is why founders get phased out. Too emotional, not scalable." The replies piled up fast. "If you can't handle your system evolving, maybe you weren't built to lead bros still clinging to legacy logic." Hoodie energy, CEO energy. He didn't respond. He knew the rules of engagement had changed. Now, they weren't just questioning his system, they were questioning his capacity to let go. But letting go of what? The hoodie, the code, the story. He sat alone that night in his apartment, screen-dimmed echo log running quietly in the background. Every deletion, every name swap, every alignment document, it was all there backed up in distributed nodes, untouched by board approval or internal rewrites. He pulled up a visualization, a branching diagram showing the origin tree of Sentinel. with his commits highlighted red nodes lit up across the timeline, places where his contributions had been removed, rebranded, or overwritten. He zoomed out. The pattern looked eerily familiar, like bias, like suppression, like the very thing Sentinel was built to expose. And in that moment, Tyrone realized something deeper. They weren't just uncomfortable with what he had built. They were terrified of how deeply he'd embedded himself in it, not as a name, but as a logic, as an ethic, as a presence. By Friday, the damage was supposed to be done. The headlines had cooled. The narrative had settled Tyrone Hall. Hoodie-wearing visionary, gracefully stepping aside so the grown-ups could take Sentinel to scale. The company moved on, or so it seemed. New policy rollouts. Product demos without his name. Strategic partnerships unveiled with smiling faces that had nothing to do with the origin of the tech. But something strange started happening. Small at first, quiet but persistent. On GitHub, a fork of Sentinel's open-source community toolkit suddenly began trending. Within 48 hours, over 20,000 developers had downloaded the archive. They weren't just using it, they were digging into the history. One contributor posted, "Wait, how is Tyrone not listed in the lead architect file anymore?" Another user replied with side-by-side commits showing the gradual removal of Tyrone's name from key documentation. Someone else ran a script through the system's earliest logs and found something buried deep in the kernel. Founder ID 001 Tyrone Hall. Build origin authenticated. It was baked into the base layer, not a credit line, not a comment, a seed. Ada Centec questions started surfacing from unexpected places. A partner NGO in Brazil requested to speak with the original system author for clarification on ethical boundary detection. A journalist from The Guardian published an op-ed titled, "Why Was Tyrone Hall Disappeared from His Own Invention?" In Slack, employees began sharing the article quietly, first in DMs, then in private channels, then unavoidably in a thread on General titled "A Tyrone Was the System." Why are we pretending otherwise? The thread was deleted in under 6 minutes, but screenshots, those live forever. Tyrone didn't post a word, didn't retweet, didn't give interviews, didn't issue a counter-narrative. He just watched. And in the silence, Sentinel's echoes grew louder because he'd coded it that way, because he knew that reputation fades, but receipts don't. That same day, Sentinel's internal ethics dashboard triggered a flag, not for a user, for itself. The bias detection protocol had looped back through recent policy changes and flagged 2 memos, both signed off by the strategy realignment team. The system labeled them ethical drift, detected obfuscation, event, historical origin, mismatch attribution, reversal. Sentinel had quietly indicted its own handlers. The board scrambled, some demanded the logs be taken down, but the auto-sync was active. The moment a change was made internally, the update was mirrored on 17 government partner dashboards, and the partners had questions. One EU agency wrote back, "Why does your ethics system say your own internal policies are compromised?" The answer, they couldn't give one, because even if they fired Tyrone, they never fired the truth. Danny, the junior dev, stopped him in the hallway that evening. She was clutching her phone, eyes wide. "Sir, did you see what Sentinel posted?" He shook his head. She turned the screen toward him. At the bottom of the interface, a small italicized line had appeared across every public-facing Sentinel dashboard. Original audit architecture designed by Tyrone Hall. For full transparency, history visit, Tyrone Hall origin. He stared at it, then exhaled slowly. It wasn't supposed to do that. But it did. Danny said it chose to remember. That night he walked through downtown Oakland in his hoodie. No destination, just momentum, just the quiet, just the rhythm of a man who had finally learned what it means to outlive the lie. A kid biking past looked at him, then back again. "Yo?" Are you the dude who built Sentinel Tyrone? Nodded once. The kid pointed at his own hoodie. My school uses it now. It flagged my teacher for marking all the black kids late, even when we weren't. They had to apologize to my mom. Tyrone smiled. A small one, then said, that's not Sentinel, that's you. He kept walking because that's what this part of the story required. Not applause, not revenge, not validation, just continuance. Because when they try to erase your presence, your hoodie has to walk on its own. It began on a Monday, but not the kind with slow coffee and team updates. It began with a headline. Sentinel founder under investigation for early data misuse. Tyrone Hall was sitting in his apartment, hoodie half-zipped, toast untouched, when his phone lit up. The article came through a group chat with a few former mentees, brilliant young coders he had trained during Sentinel's rise. At first, he thought it was fake, a clickbait piece, but the outlet was real. The journalist was verified. The formatting too clean to be rushed. He clicked. The piece cited anonymous internal sources who claimed that during Sentinel's early pilot phase, there may have been unapproved access to third-party data without full legal documentation. It said nothing specific, no dates, no names, no hard evidence. But it mentioned his, while no charges have been filed. Tyrone Hall has reportedly disengaged from all day-to-day operations. Ascentech has declined to comment. He didn't decline. No one had asked him. Within hours, the story spread like algorithmic wildfire. Twitter picked it up. Tech influencers ran threads speculating on the risks of founder-led ethics startups. LinkedIn lit up with posts from people who'd never met him, never seen a line of code in Sentinel, but somehow had opinions about his supposed reckless ambition. One post stood out. This is why founders need adult supervision. Vision is not governance. Another from hoodie to headline, cautionary tale in the making. And there it was again, the hoodie. Not as symbol, not as resistance, but as branding for guilt. Inside Ascentech, they didn't say much. No direct communication, no formal accusations, just a noticeable chill. Meeting invites vanished. His Slack account was downgraded to external collaborator. His badge stopped opening the third-floor lab. He hadn't been fired, but functionally he was already out. And now they weren't just erasing him, they were defining him. At 10:46 a.m., Danny rushed into his office, eyes wide. Did you see what legal just pushed? He nodded. She dropped a printed memo on his desk. Subject, external review of historical data compliance. From a Ascentech legal and risk division language was careful neutral, but the implication was poisonous. In light of recent questions raised regarding early-stage product deployment, we are initiating an internal review to ensure all protocols were followed prior to Sentinel's go-to-market launch. This is a standard measure and does not indicate wrongdoing. Tyrone laughed, softly bitterly. They just put a target on my name and called it due diligence. That afternoon, he sat in the cafeteria, same hoodie, same corner seat, same silence. Except now people didn't just avoid eye contact. They avoided the aura. It was the smell of scandal, and nobody in corporate wants to get splashed. Danny sat across from him with a tray she barely touched. They're making you a liability, a black liability in a hoodie. He nodded. And when the noise calms down, they'll say they were just protecting the company. She leaned forward. So what? Now, you gonna sue them? Go on a podcast. Tyrone stared into the distance, then said, almost whispering, no, I'm going to remind them what the system remembers. That night, he accessed Echo Log's encrypted legacy fork. Buried beneath Sentinel's deployment shell, he'd quietly created a ledger, a time-stamped archive of every client interaction, legal approval, and pilot data. Access signature. Not for leverage, but for protection. Because he always knew this day could come, he packaged the logs into a single clean repository, www.hall legerio, then published it. No announcement, no commentary. Just a link posted anonymously on a civic tech forum he'd once helped fund. By morning, the damage control machine started glitching. Nonprofits from Sentinel's pilot era began posting public statements confirming Tyrone's compliance. Civil rights groups chimed in. We've worked with Tyrone Hall. We signed those data agreements ourselves. This narrative is false. The original article was updated quietly. One sentence added at the bottom. News sources have confirmed documentation may have existed at the time. We will continue updating this story. But it was too late. The lie had trended, and Tyrone's hoodie, now attached to a new tag, disgraced tech founder. He didn't fight it, didn't issue a rebuttal video, didn't write a Medium essay. He simply added one line of code to the public echo log mirror. The problem with erasing someone like Tyrone Hall was simple. He didn't build his story in ink. He built it in code, and code doesn't forget. The morning after the smear article dropped, a Centex media team tried to shift the tone, posting a blog titled, "Clarifying Our Commitment to Data Integrity." They avoided names, used generic language, talked about ongoing evaluations and institutional learning. But the damage was already done. The public had heard just enough to doubt. The investors had seen just enough to hesitate, and Tyrone, the black man in the hoodie, had become the perfect placeholder for controversy. Not proven guilty, just no longer safe to be associated with. Except this time they miscalculated. They assumed Tyrone would retreat, disappear, maybe send a lawyer, maybe go offline. Instead, he opened his laptop, logged into Echolog, and pushed a private protocol he'd never activated before. Mirror burst, event slander, mode public recall. Within minutes, Sentinel's passive audit trail, the same one Tyrone had coded to silently record inconsistencies, removals and executive overrides, began doing something unexpected. It started talking. On every Sentinel instance used by NGOs, schools, and public agencies, a small new link appeared. Transparency Ledger View, foundational records of data use and authorship. It wasn't flashy, no colors, no branding, no press push, but those who clicked saw everything. Dated emails confirming pilot access from partner organizations, digital signatures from legal departments authorizing anonymized data sets. Early internal memos crediting Tyrone's designs as essential architecture. Every denial the company had made, every word they tried to twist undone, not through a press release, through receipts. Inside a Centec, the board panicked. Their legal team held an emergency meeting. Someone from PR sent out a suppression request to one of the nonprofit dashboards. The dashboard ignored it because it wasn't under a Centec's control anymore. Tyrone had decentralized the mirrors. Each one housed its own truth. Trying to erase one only made the others more visible, like light refracting through shattered glass. That afternoon, a user on X, formerly Twitter, posted a thread, just found out a Centec tried to bury the black man who built Sentinel. But the code's alive. It remembers who wrote it. The post got 40,000 likes in 3 hours. Under it, people began sharing screenshots of Tyrone's original commit logs, his Slack messages, his design notes from 2017. The caption most people used, "The system doesn't forget the black hands that built it." Tyrone watched it unfold in silence. Not with joy, not even relief, but with clarity. Because this had never been about vindication, it had always been about control. They had tried to take the story, twist it, break it, replace it. But they didn't understand the power of seated truth. Tyrone hadn't written a defense. He had written proof, and now it was replicating itself. At 3:14 p.m., a whistleblower inside a Centec leaked a set of internal messages. Executives discussing how to disconnect from the founder's reputation. One line stood out. "We need to make sure Tyrone becomes the past, not the brand." That sentence went viral. By sunset, it was on the front page of TechCrunch, and once again there was Tyrone's face, hoodie up, head down. But this time the headline didn't say "Founder in Crisis." It said "Founder Fights Back with Facts, the System Speaks." Danny called him from the fourth floor. Her voice was tight. They're freezing budgets on every project tied to you. Let them. You're not worried. He paused, staring at the line of blinking logs cascading down his screen. I'm not trying to keep my seat. I'm trying to keep the mirror clean. That night, he updated Hall Ledger with a new tab, erasure attempts. It listed every instance where his name had been removed, modified, or downplayed with dates, users, and associated decisions. No commentary, just documentation. Because when your story is stolen, you don't scream it back. You log it where no one can edit. By the end of the week, Tyrone Hall had become the most quietly dangerous man in tech. Not because he threatened anyone, not because he sued, but because he didn't flinch, and worse yet, he didn't disappear. Ascendtech had already crossed every line. They had erased him from documents, blamed him for policy gaps, accused him implicitly of data mishandling. But now the story they created was out of their control. It started with a developer conference in New York. A young black engineer took the stage to present a civic data tool built on Sentinel's open source layer. In the middle of the demo, he paused, switched slides, and displayed a commit log with Tyrone's name. None of this exists without the man they tried to silence. The room went still, then erupted into applause. Clips from the moment flooded social media. Within hours, a new hashtag began trending. Built by Hall memes, code screenshots, photos of people in hoodies holding laptops with stickers that read, "The system remembers Tyrone didn't create it. He didn't ask for it, but the movement had built itself on the foundation he laid." At Ascendtech, things began to unravel. Two international partners froze, funding pending internal investigation. One school district requested clarity on Sentinel's authorship and ethical review process. An investor group demanded to meet with the original architect, not the Rewritten team pressure mounted. And for the first time since the campaign to erase him began, they reached out. An email from the CEO, subject line, "Let's talk polite." Careful, full of vague empathy. "We never intended for things to escalate. There's still space for reconciliation and legacy. Let's find a path forward that honors the work." Tyrone read it twice, then wrote back, "Legacy isn't something you give me. It's something I left in the code you couldn't corrupt." The next morning, his legal team received a formal request from Ascendtech to collaborate on a shared narrative strategy. He declined. Instead, he launched a new platform, Mirrorverse.org, a digital archive of Sentinel's origin, not just code but emails, early sketches, values, purpose. Alongside it, he published an open letter. They tried to delete the man in the hoodie, but they didn't realize the story wasn't mine anymore. It belongs to every coder who got rejected because they weren't the right fit. Every black girl who built a tool that got branded under someone else's name. Every community that used data to protect their own when no one else would. This isn't about attribution, it's about truth. And truth, once mirrored, refuses to be made quiet again. The post went viral, journalists picked it up, founders reposted it, developers sent messages from Brazil, Nigeria, Korea, Detroit. They said, "I didn't know I was allowed to build like this. You made me believe the hoodie doesn't have to come off to be taken seriously. Your story made me stay in the room." Meanwhile, inside Ascendtech, the boardroom grew colder. One executive resigned. Another issued a public statement apologizing for contributing to a narrative of erasure, but it was too late. The mirrors were online. The truth had been cached in 1,000 places. The black story they tried to erase had been backed up, forked, encrypted, and re-uploaded into the public conscience. Tyrone didn't go back to the office. He didn't want a seat at their table anymore, because he understood something now. Power isn't in the room, it's in the reflection, and if the room is scared of what it sees in the mirror, let it tremble. That night, as Oakland lights flickered over pavement, he stood in front of a mural painted by local students, a black man in a hoodie walking forward, his shadow trailing data streams and broken chains. Below it, one sentence. "Remember who wrote the first line?" He smiled, not because he'd won, but because they lost the right to define what winning looked like. Walter Hall didn't show up in suits. He didn't walk with a briefcase or wear cufflinks or quote strategy decks. He didn't post, didn't tweet, didn't even own a LinkedIn account. But when he walked through a Centex lobby, everyone noticed security didn't stop him. Reception didn't ask questions. They just watched as a 6'3" man in a faded denim jacket and worn Timberlands stepped across marble floors like he had poured the concrete himself. No name tag, no appointment. But every step said one thing: you crossed the line. Now you answer to someone who remembers where it was drawn. Walter had been silent through it all. The erasure. The media lies, the soft takedowns dressed as restructure. He watched quietly as they rewrote his son's story in real time, turning his legacy into a liability. But now with the data smear still fresh, and Sentinel trying to be repackaged without the soul that birthed it, he made a decision, not to speak on behalf of his son, but to remind the world who raised him. He didn't go to the CEO's office. He went to facilities, found the old custodian he knew from the first time Tyrone got his internship at a Centec, back when the office still had cracked windows and vending machines that only took coins. They shook hands without words. Then Walter asked, "Is there still a key to the founder's floor?" The old man didn't blink. Elevator code never changed. Walter nodded and rode up in silence. The 12th floor was quiet now. No reception desk, no team chatter, no signs of Tyrone. Just a long glass hallway filled with marketing trophies and board photos. Walter looked at each picture like he was staring through time. Then he pulled out his phone, a flip phone, and dialed, "You still got that kid who did the speech at the community tech fair, the one that mentioned Tyrone Paws. Good, tell him to meet me. We're going to write a different kind of keynote." Back downstairs, the Ascentech chief communications officer finally noticed the visitor logs. "Who the hell is Walter Hall?" The security intern shrugged. He didn't check in, just walked through like he belonged. Tyrone didn't know his father was in the building until he got the message. "Your dad's in the founder wing alone." He dropped everything and sprinted up the stairs. Not the elevator, because if Walter Hall was sitting in his old office, it wasn't for comfort, it was a warning. When he pushed open the door, his father was standing by the glass wall looking out at the city. He didn't turn around, just said, "They ever ask how much of you came from me?" Tyrone caught his breath. No thought, so silence. Then Walter turned slowly. "Son, you're not going to fix this in code. You need to let them see what kind of man raised the architect they tried to erase." Tyrone didn't reply right away. Then he said, "They don't listen to men like you." Dad, Walter stepped forward. "Not until we stop talking and start moving in silence so loud they can't sleep through it." He handed Tyrone a USB drive, unlabeled clean. "Every contract I signed when I helped launch the first community pilot. Every paper you had me witness. It's all there. You kept all that. I don't forget what they pretend never happened." The next day, Walter made one phone call, then another, then 10 more. By sunset, a quiet coalition was forming. Not lawyers, not influencers, elders, veterans, parents, coders, activists, the kind of people who don't go viral but make the systems that eventually do. Tyrone watched it all in awe, not because he didn't know what his father was capable of, but because now the system that tried to bury him had a whole generation coming to dig him back out. Walter Hall had never been invited to a boardroom. Not when Tyrone got his first grant. Not when Sentinel landed its first citywide partnership. Not even when Ascentech went public. He didn't ask for access because he'd spent his life watching how power reacts when black men don't knock first. But now with his son's legacy twisted, Walter wasn't here for permission. He was here to make the room remember that silence isn't weakness, it's fuel. The first thing he did wasn't loud. It was lunch, a quiet meal with 3 men in worn jackets and county IDs seated outside a cafe 2 blocks from a Centec. All of them had one thing in common. Their children had been mentored by Tyrone Hall. and their communities had adopted Sentinel during the early pilot phase. One of them, Mr. DeWitt, spoke softly. I still got the email where they promised attribution on every interface. My daughter built the bias map for the Oakland beta. They wiped her too, Walter nodded. Then let's get your kids their names back. By nightfall, 12 more names were on the list. Mothers, teachers, public health data managers. People who had quietly powered the engine under Sentinel's surface, never paid, never praised, always watching. Walter moved like he always had. Off the grid, through favors, handshakes, kitchen table alliances, no tweets, no speeches, just calls that couldn't be tracked, but couldn't be ignored either. 2 days later, without warning, 4 local newspapers ran op-eds from community leaders titled, "The Same Way We Didn't Build It to Be Sold Without Us." They spoke of the early days of Walter bringing Tyrone into after-school data labs, of how Sentinel started as a tool to track evictions in black neighborhoods, of how Walter used his old union connections to convince city leaders to test the system before Silicon Valley even cared. They named names, and they named Walter. The man behind the man in the hoodie. A Centec tried to contain it. But this wasn't a viral scandal. This was history with a witness, and that's something no PR team can delete. Meanwhile, Tyrone watched it all unfold like a documentary he didn't know he starred in. He'd always assumed his father's silence meant detachment. Now he realized it had meant preparation, because Walter had never been absent. He'd just been waiting until the story needed volume. In a closed Zoom call with 14 community leaders, Walter spoke just once. He looked into the camera, quiet, steady. They thought taking my son's name off the code would stop the system from reflecting them, but all they did was give us a reason to remind the mirror who built it. Silence, then applause. Not the viral kind, the slow, heavy kind from people who've carried weight too long to clap lightly. That same week, something happened in Ascentech's backend servers. A code push appeared with no attached username. Just a line that read, Memory Restore, Protocol Hall Legacy, V1. Restore original contributor metadata on all civic-facing Sentinel deployments. Within hours, dozens of municipal dashboards updated at the footer of each one. System design originally contributed by Tyrone Hall and community technologists of Oakland, CA. The board panicked. Someone tried to reverse the push, but the code was locked. Password protected with a key that traced back to an account tied to the original beta launch email, signed by Walter Hall. They'd given him access back when Sentinel was just a hopeful prototype, and they'd forgotten to revoke it because they'd never seen him as part of the system, just part of the background. Now the background was speaking, not yelling, not fighting, just correcting the record with precision, with history, with a kind of authority that no badge or board vote could replicate. And Ascentech, they were finally listening, because when a father walks into your building without a briefcase, when he doesn't ask for his seat at the table, when he says nothing, but the system starts remembering out loud, you stop underestimating the shadows. Walter Hall never liked paperwork, but he respected it. He respected the power of a signature, the quiet gravity of a timestamp, the way a simple line on a forgotten form could later become a sword. So when he found out they were scrubbing his son's name off everything, not just from websites but from official data lineage records, he didn't yell. He reached for the old manila folder he kept in his garage. The one with Thal, 2016-2020, written in block letters inside were signed pilot agreements, original NDA scans, grant letters, handwritten feedback from the first school that tested Sentinel. He scanned every page, then sent them to 6 people, not journalists, librarians. Because librarians never delete anything. The librarians uploaded the documents to the National Civic Code Archive, a decentralized government independent repository for public impact technologies. Within 24 hours, they published a formal archive, Sentinel Project Founding Records, Hall Collection. The file was verified, digitally signed, cross-referenced, it became public record. Not a press stunt, not a tweet history. A Centex legal team scrambled. They sent a takedown request, the archive's response. We do not remove verified civic materials unless legally compelled by a court of record. And Walter smiled, because he knew they'd never won a court case. Not with everything he had stored, not with a community watching, not with 1,000 coders already whispering the name. Walter Hall in every back-channel thread. Meanwhile, Tyrone was sitting on his fire escape hoodie, up watching the sky glow orange with dusk. His inbox had been quiet, until suddenly, it wasn't. Subject lines rolled in like a wave. Mr. Hall, thank you for building Sentinel. You helped my neighborhood, and they tried to take it away. My father built things too. He would have respected you. Dozens then, hundreds, from teenagers' mothers. Retired city staffers who remembered how the system started, not in Silicon Valley, but in kitchens, barbershops, and church basements. The next day, Walter walked not into a Centec, but into a town hall meeting in East Oakland. No press, no live stream, just folding chairs, old coffee, and a circle of elders who knew what it meant to build something without getting credit for it. He stood up and spoke with the same calm that had once silenced an entire classroom when Tyrone got suspended for talking back to a teacher who erased his name off a group project. They thought taking his name off the code would erase what we made. But when you grow a tree with your own hands, the roots don't vanish because somebody painted over the trunk. Someone in the back whispered, "Say that again." And Walter did. The moment went viral, not because it was filmed, because someone wrote it on a whiteboard in a high school and posted a photo. Then someone else printed it on a t-shirt. Then it appeared on a subway mural. And suddenly the phrase, "the roots don't vanish," became the heartbeat of a movement that had outgrown the erasure it was born from. Meanwhile, inside a Centec, the board met in panic mode. Product adoption was stalling. 3 civic partners requested re-review of contributor acknowledgement, and the internal ethics committee, once sidelined, issued a formal memo. We recommend restoring original attributions to prevent long-term reputational risk translation. Put the names back before the mirror shatters for good. They tried reaching out again. Emails to Walter, polite calls, meeting requests with vague headers like reconciling legacy and moving forward together. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The people had answered for him, and every dashboard still pinging. System built on the work of Tyrone Hall was its own reply. One night back on the same rooftop where father and son used to talk through math problems under stars, Tyrone asked, "Why now? Dad, why show up?" Now Walter didn't even look up, because now the room was finally quiet enough to hear us. Tyrone nodded. "You think they'll ever apologize?" Walter chuckled. "They already did. They just called it policy reversal." They stood together, 2 shadows with steel in their blood, watching the skyline blink like silent code. And beneath them, a city that once tried to forget, now remembered loudly, clearly, permanently. It didn't happen overnight, not all at once, not with a bang. But the fall came, and when it did, it was methodical, precise, unforgiving. Like the systems they tried to hijack. Like the truth Tyrone Hall had built into the very core of Sentinel. It began with an email, subject urgent, temporary suspension of Sentinel for external partners, sent at 5:12 a.m., buried under layers of corporate jargon. But to those who understood the language, it was clear. Due to discrepancies in internal attribution, documentation, and external challenges regarding system integrity, Centec is pausing Sentinel's enterprise deployment pending an internal ethics review. In other words, we've been caught. Inside the building, panic bloomed like black mold. Nobody said it out loud, but they all knew the code wasn't backing down. The truth, the actual time-stamped line-by-line truth, had been embedded too deeply. Every attempt to overwrite Tyrone's legacy to cleanly separate the brand from the man in the hoodie had backfired because Sentinel wasn't just code, it was a witness. They tried to pivot, rebranding the system, changing the name to Ethos AI, new logos, new color scheme, corporate videos with piano music and smiling executives. But the moment they deployed the update, something strange happened. In over 600 live systems, schools, hospitals, civic dashboards, a pop-up appeared. Original architecture based on Sentinel developed by Tyrone Hall and community co-designers. Data integrity review in progress. Echo log had kicked in. The protocol was quiet, but persistent, it remembered. Journalists caught wind fast. Some had been following the story since Walter Hall's archive hit the Civic Code repository. Others had been tipped off by the open-source community engineers, comparing back-end fingerprints, digging through logs, tracing authorship. A Pulitzer-winning investigative team dropped the first major expose. The mirror cracked. How a Centec tried to rebrand. Integrity front page photo of Tyrone in grayscale hoodie on sitting in the corner of a data lab. Caption, the system didn't fail, the company did. Then came the internal leaks, Slack messages from C-suite executives joking about neutralizing the founder narrative. A strategy deck titled Post-Founder Public Confidence Plan. A red-line document proposing to scrub all early-stage contributors from public-facing materials unless their media profile meets brand tone. People had screenshots. People were angry because this wasn't just about Tyrone anymore. It was about every Black creator whose fingerprints got wiped when the product became profitable. Tyrone didn't do interviews, didn't post videos, didn't sign a book deal. He sat in the same apartment, hoodie zipped, watching the mirror do exactly what he had built it to do. Reflect without bias, log without fear, speak when silenced. The company bled. 4 of their largest civic contracts were terminated within 48 hours. A national teachers union issued a formal letter. We are suspending use of the Sentinel-based platform pending full restoration of contributor attribution and ethical safeguards. Investors backed out. 2 VCs quietly removed a Centec from their featured success pages and the public. They didn't protest. They just stopped believing. Meanwhile, a new wave of young engineers, many Black, many brown, many queer, started posting under a new hashtag Ghosts. The code posts like built a language classifier that saved a Black student from a wrongful expulsion. Thank you, Tyrone Hall. Our city just switched to an audit tool based on Sentinel's ethics model, no longer afraid of the data. Thank you. They erased the founder, but the function stayed. Thank you. The hoodie had become more than apparel. It was a uniform, a signal, a story. Walter Hall, ever silent, ever watching, issued just one sentence to a reporter who caught him outside a neighborhood meeting. You can replace a man, but if he built a system with a spine, you'll have to break every bone in it to make it forget. They couldn't break it. It was too late. They tried to blame the interns. That was the first instinct. Claim improper attribution was the result of a mismanaged documentation migration. That early contributors were unintentionally omitted during system updates. They even drafted a slide deck for internal alignment, complete with flowcharts explaining how legacy metadata had failed to load properly during the product transformation phase. But by then, nobody was listening because the code itself was telling another story. In offices across the country school district, tech leads and local government IT directors were reading the logs. Sentinel had quietly made public Echo log had been documenting every erasure attempt. Who deleted Tyrone's name when it was removed? Which system update pushed it? Which executive approved it? It wasn't speculation, it was receipts. And receipts don't care about strategy decks. At one city council meeting in Minneapolis, a deputy CTO held up a printed sheet, lines of terminal output, attribution strings, from the original Oakland pilot. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a log file. He dropped the paper on the table like a gavel. And I'm not risking federal compliance over a company that can't admit who built their foundation. One by one, public contracts fell apart. Not with lawsuits, with silence. Budgets were quietly redirected, access keys deactivated, support tickets marked no longer a partner. Ascendtech's once glowing partner map turned from blue to gray, and no amount of investor webinars or video campaigns could bring back what was already gone. Trust. Inside the company, the rot accelerated. The internal ethics team, once relegated to advisory status, posted a resignation letter signed by 13 members. It read, "We were hired to keep the company aligned with its mission. When that mission became branding, we were no longer needed. We leave with our integrity intact, something your systems no longer carry." Someone leaked the letter. It hit the front page of Hacker News in under 4 hours. Engineers everywhere nodded because they'd seen it before, but never this openly. The second major collapse came when Stanford University rescinded a partnership agreement with Ascendtech's Ethics Research Division. Their statement was short: research built on, erased truth is not research, it's marketing. Students began removing Ascendtech's name from slide decks. Faculty edited it out of citations. Within a week, 7 other academic institutions followed suit. Tyrone stayed quiet through all of it. No interviews, no opinion pieces, no podiums. He worked from his same laptop, in the same chair, in the same hoodie, watching, because this wasn't vengeance. This was self-correction, the system doing what it had always been meant to do: not punish, illuminate. But others weren't quiet. A former Ascendtech engineer posted a video from her bedroom floor. "Tired eyes, no makeup. I stayed quiet when they started removing names. Thought it was just process. But now I see what they were doing. Tyrone Hall taught me that silence can be its own kind of violence. So this is me not being silent anymore." The video got 23 million views. People began replying with their own confessions. "I was told to downplay legacy references in a product pitch. They said too many black names on the slide wasn't brand safe. We deleted the sentence about community origins because legal said it was too specific." A new open source project launched on GitHub, Sentinel Plus, a reclamation fork built by former employees, mentees, and volunteer coders. Every contributor clearly credited every layer traceable to original input. It didn't just rebuild Sentinel, it reclaimed it. And on the splash page, one line: "Restored from memory, protected by truth." By the third week, Ascendtech's stock value had dropped by 27%. The CEO stepped down for personal reasons. The board promised a strategic realignment focused on healing and reconciliation, but it was too late because the world wasn't asking for their strategy anymore. It was asking, where was your spine when the truth needed defending? Tyrone read the question online. He didn't reply. He didn't need to, because the mirror had already answered, and its reflection couldn't be blurred anymore. By the third week after the takedown began, Ascendtech was barely standing. The public had moved on. The headlines had quieted, but not because people stopped caring. They stopped believing. And in the world of technology, once trust evaporates, all that's left is the silence of missed logins. Inside their headquarters, the energy had changed completely. The executive floor, once buzzing with curated optimism and venture-backed confidence, now felt like a waiting room with no clock. Meetings were shorter. Eye contact was rare. Nobody mentioned the word Sentinel in the HR Slack. Someone typed, "Should we remove Tyrone's name from the old team archive?" Finally, a reply came within seconds from a junior dev who had never spoken up before. "We already did. And look where that got us." No one replied after that. Across town in a co-working space he rented by the month, Tyrone Hall sat in front of a monitor hoodie, loose black coffee cooling beside him. He wasn't building a company. He wasn't pitching a product. He was running diagnostics, not on code, but on his legacy. He had spent years building a system meant to reflect injustice. Now he was watching as the same system reflected the people who tried to rewrite him. A soft ping came from his Echo Trust interface. New deployment detected, source Nairobi Public Transport Authority. Another one seconds later, confirmed attribution architect. Tyrone Hall, Sentinel Protocol. He smiled the kind of smile that doesn't stretch the face, just settles into the bones. They tried to erase him, but now his presence was encoded in every update. Every time a civic server ran Echolog, every time a flag was raised about bias and school suspension rates, his fingerprint activated quietly in the background. Walter Hall called him later that day. Didn't say hello, didn't ask how he was. He just said, "You hear about the last drop." Tyrone turned to the news tab. There it was. A Centec ethics division shuts down following internal audit leak. He read the subtitle aloud. Final report cites systemic removal of founder contributions as primary cause of trust collapse. Walter didn't chuckle, didn't gloat. He just said, truth got a rhythm. You just had to let it play long enough. Tyrone leaned back in his chair, exhaled. You think they learned anything? Walter replied. Don't matter, the ones who needed to see it saw it. Online, a short video clip was going viral. A middle school teacher in Cleveland had asked her class to define the word attribution. One girl stood up and said, "It's when you remember the person who made something before the people who tried to take it." Behind her, written on the board, was a phrase Tyrone Hall wrote the mirror. The mirror kept his name. In Ghana, a new civic dashboard launched using Echo Trust as a base layer. Their lead engineer, a woman named Amma, posted a launch update. It ended with, "We don't just use black code, we cite black code." A Centex board attempted one last pivot. They put out a white paper on post-attribution era design, trying to position themselves as thought leaders on distributing innovation beyond ego. It flopped. Not because it was poorly written, but because the world had already moved past them. Tyrone didn't retaliate. He didn't post his own white paper. He didn't write a revenge thread. He walked through his city, now a little older, a little quieter, but still very much present. Not in headlines, but in systems, in dashboards and code, in the way people spoke his name without having to shout it. One rainy afternoon, he visited the old community center where Sentinel was first prototyped. A mural had been painted on the side. A black boy at a keyboard, hoodie up city, reflected in the screen. On the monitor were the words, "Built by the ones they tried to forget." Beneath it, someone had written, "System V10 Hall T." He didn't cry, didn't take a photo. He just stood there, letting the rain land like punctuation on a story that refused to be edited again. That night, a message hit his inbox. Subject we remember and we cite. It was from a new coalition of Black technologists launching a platform for young coders in underserved communities. They asked if he'd review their ethics model. He replied with just one word, gladly. The fall of a Centec wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because when the system keeps receipts and the silence breaks itself, there's nothing left for the guilty to stand on, and everything left for the truth to rise from. 6 months had passed since a Centec's last breath. No final press conference, no tearful apology, just an error message on their former homepage, and a ghosted LinkedIn page nobody updated, but Tyrone Hall was still standing. Not behind a microphone, not in a conference hall, but in a room with mismatched chairs, chipped desks, and kids who reminded him of himself before the hoodie meant anything to anyone but him. This place wasn't glamorous, a repurposed city library annex in South LA. Paint peeling, Wi-Fi unstable, but it had energy and purpose. The sign out front, painted by hand, read, Hall Data Lab, build systems that remember who built them. Inside, 24 students sat in front of secondhand laptops, fingers hovering over keys, heads bent low. Ages ranged from 13 to 17, but their questions heavy real. Questions like, how do we stop them from changing the code after we write it? Who decides who gets credit? What happens when they take our idea and sell it back to us? Tyrone stood in the center of the room. No slides, no buzzwords, Just a dry erase board with two columns at the top. Truth and narrative. He pointed between them. Truth is what happened. Narrative is what gets remembered. Our job. Your job is to keep them as close together as possible. A boy near the window raised his hand. Young skinny hoodie tied around his waist. But what if they just delete us again? Tyrone stepped closer, looked the boy in the eye. Then you make it harder next time. You build receipts into the system. You write like the code knows who you are, even if they don't. The lab wasn't about teaching Python or React. Those came later. First, Tyrone taught them how systems get rewritten, how patent offices forget who filed first, how headlines prefer the safer face, how even the most brilliant black and brown creators disappear in footnotes. Then he taught them how to stop that from happening again, not with protest, but with protocols. One student lyric designed an extension called Trace It. It scanned user interfaces for missing attributions in AI applications and flagged inconsistencies in published credit chains. When asked why, she said, "I don't want to go viral, I want to be verifiable." Another team created a plugin that added a voice tag to any AI response. This tool was built with code contributed by the community. "We see you." They laughed the first time it ran, but no one turned it off because it sounded like honesty. The projects weren't perfect. Some broke after 5 minutes, some didn't launch at all. But Tyrone clapped anyway. Every line of code, even broken, was resistance. Every push to GitHub was a fingerprint. Every idea they protected was one more they couldn't steal later. He'd turned down all the offers, the keynote invites, the university chairs, the ethics boards with honorariums and title tags. He didn't need validation. He needed continuance. One night after class, a girl named Zoe stayed behind. She hadn't spoken much all week, barely typed in class, but she handed him a flash drive. "This is a poetry algorithm I made. It writes back when people leave anonymous hate in the comments." Thought it could help someone. He took it, held it like it was glass. It already did. Outside the lab, the world kept spinning. New tech startups emerged, new tools launched, new attempts to rename ideas that had been born in small neighborhoods like this one. But something had changed. People were watching. Not just what tools did, but who made them. And in that shift, Tyrone saw hope. The lesson wasn't in the fall of Ascentech. It was in what rose afterward. Quiet, focused, undeniable kids who didn't want the spotlight. They just wanted their names remembered the right way. Kids who didn't care if their tools went viral. They just wanted proof of authorship baked in from the start. And Tyrone, he didn't want applause. He just wanted to make sure that next time someone like him walked into a pitch meeting in a hoodie, they wouldn't have to fight to stay in the frame. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Hall Data Lab became a different kind of classroom. Not the kind where you raise your hand to ask for permission. The kind where the room asked you what story you were coding and whether it reflected your name or erased it. Tyrone started the day not with syntax, but with silence. He'd write one question on the board. That day's was simple. Who gets erased first when a system breaks? Nobody spoke at first. Then Jamal, a 15-year-old whose keyboard was covered in anime stickers, muttered, "The one who built it." Tyrone nodded. "Exactly." He stepped forward. Every system has a fault line, and that fault line usually runs under someone who looks like us. He clicked the projector on. An image appeared. It wasn't code. It was a photo of 4 black men in front of a NASA computer from 1965. No names listed in the caption. Tyrone turned to the class. They helped launch a man to the moon. You've probably never heard of them. Why Zoe answered this time, arms folded tight, because credit has a skin tone. The class broke into teams that afternoon. The project was called Echo Chains. Each group would build a simple AI tool. Didn't matter what it did, but there was one rule. Every layer had to include embedded authorship that couldn't be removed without breaking the whole thing. They called it grit-linked metadata. Lyric's group built a chat mod for anti-bullying forums. Jamal's group prototyped a budget tracking assistant in Spanglish for undocumented families. Zoe's group created a program that generated timelines of community events from oral history recordings. Each one had different functions, but they all had the same heartbeat. You can't use this unless you carry its creators with it. The following week, Tyrone invited a guest, an elder named Mr. Powell, a former data analyst from the 80s laid off after a startup was acquired and rebranded without any of the original team's input. He brought a box of old punch cards, held one up. This is how we stored memory before everything went digital. You lose this whole system gone. He paused. That's how they did us. Except they didn't need to lose the card. They just pretended it was blank. He looked at the class. Don't give them blank cards to write over. That day, the students didn't just listen. They downloaded his entire punch card archive into a digital simulation. They coded a visualization that played jazz tones every time a new line of original contribution was traced. They called it memory music. It wasn't flashy, but it was beautiful. It reminded them that data wasn't just cold. It had rhythm pulse people. Later that month, Hall Data Lab received a message from a small museum in Atlanta. They asked if they could feature some of the students' projects in an exhibit called Code as Legacy, the hidden histories of Black technologists. The kids didn't celebrate. They discussed licensing models, they studied Creative Commons versus public domain, and when they replied, they added a clause. All displayed software must include active attribution fields. All contributors listed by full name in alphabetical order. The museum said yes, no edits. Tyrone stood back and watched as these teenagers, most of whom had never written a line of code 6 months ago, now talked like lawyers and architects. Not because they were jaded, but because they were awake, they understood the game now. And more importantly, they were rewriting the rules. After one long day, Jamal stayed behind. He approached Tyrone while folding up chairs. Do you think it'll be different for us? You know, when we start building stuff out there. Tyrone paused, then said, if you keep receipts, if you log your name into every layer, if you teach your tools to speak for you when you're not in the room, then yes, it'll be different. Jamal nodded. Good, because I don't want to fight for credit. I just want to be impossible to delete. That night, Tyrone walked home under the streetlights. Hoodie zipped to the collar, hands deep in his pockets. He didn't feel like a leader. He felt like a mirror finally polished enough to reflect the light of kids who didn't want fame. They wanted proof. And in that desire, he saw something more powerful than any system he'd ever written. Continuity. The first public showcase of Hall Data Lab's student work was never meant to be big. No one rented out a convention hall. No influencers were invited. There was no red carpet, no live stream, no viral trailer, just a small auditorium at a local college. Folding chairs, paper name tags, a table with juice boxes and snacks from the corner store. And yet every seat was filled, because word had spread not through marketing but through reverence. These weren't students anymore. They were builders. On stage, Jamal stood in front of a projector, hoodie, zipped palms slightly sweating. His team had created Budget Echo, an AI-driven personal finance assistant tailored for low-income immigrant households. It could switch between Spanish and Tagalog. It didn't require a bank account, and most importantly, it kept every user's data offline and encrypted. But that wasn't what earned the standing ovation. It was what played before the demo even started, a soft female voice speaking through the program itself. This tool was developed by Jamal Carter, Layla Kim, and Mateo Ruiz. All decisions were made collectively, all work attributed equally. This system will not run if you remove any of our names. They tried removing a name during testing. It shut down instantly by design. The crowd didn't cheer because the tool was brilliant. They cheered because it could not be stolen. Next up, Lyric presented Trace It 20, now connected to a growing network of databases that tracked academic citations, corporate software credits, and even marketing decks from major firms. The program flagged every instance where a known black or brown innovator's name was omitted, shortened, or removed. Each infraction was logged, time-stamped, and sent to a global transparency board run by students. If you forget us, lyrics said into the mic will remember ourselves louder. Tyrone sat in the back row, arms crossed over his chest, saying nothing. He didn't need to, because this moment wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about replication. What he had once coded in solitude, these kids had now multiplied with intention. He wasn't watching a demo. He was watching the future deploy itself. During the break, a woman approached him. Late 30s, glasses, a lanyard that read, Detroit Public Schools, Tech Equity Unit. We want to license everything we saw here, but only if the students remain in control. Tyrone raised an eyebrow. You asking for permission? She smiled. I'm asking who to send the contract to, because we're not putting another faceless system in our schools. He gestured toward Lyric and Jamal in the corner, surrounded by classmates. You send it to them. They know what a good deal looks like now. Later that evening, as the students cleaned up juice boxes and stacked chairs, Zoe lingered by the stage. She wasn't on a team. Her project hadn't launched, but she had helped everyone test theirs, debug their logic, proofread every attribution. String Tyrone noticed her staring at the dark projector screen. You good, she shrugged. I didn't build anything, just supported. He walked to the projector. Type something. Suddenly on the screen, bold white letters appeared. This event was made possible by Zoe Williams. System integrity tested and verified by her hands. Without her, nothing runs clean. She stared, then looked away fast. That's too much, Tyrone smiled. No, that's minimum. The next morning, a thread went viral on X, a short clip of Budget Echo, refusing to launch without proper attribution. A caption. What if all our tools protected our names like this? Replies poured in. Give these kids every grant. The future is not brand safe, it's credit accurate. Black tech doesn't need saviors, just system access and receipts. By noon, the thread had 1 million views. By midnight Hall, Data Lab's donation link had crashed from traffic, but none of it changed the routine. The next week, Tyrone opened the lab just like always. He wrote the question of the day on the board. Can they take it from you if it only runs with your name attached? He stepped back and let them answer. Some coded, some debated, some just sat there thinking, and that was enough, because what Ascentech once stole, these students were now making theft-proof. 6 months after the fall of Ascentech, Tyrone Hall walked into the Hall Data Lab just as the sun broke through the blinds. The room was empty, chairs tucked in, screens, dark whiteboard, still holding yesterday's question. What makes a system stay honest when its builders are gone? He capped the marker, rolled up his sleeves, opened the window. Let the world in. Outside, the street pulsed with morning rhythm, a fruit vendor setting up crates, a grandmother watering her stoop garden, 3 middle schoolers rapping badly but confidently over a beatbox loop. This was the real system. No APIs, no dashboards, no corporate oversight, just stories in motion, unscripted. Tyrone sat by the front window, hoodie draped on the chair behind him, sipping gas station coffee like it was from a Parisian cafe. On the desk sat 3 notebooks from students who'd stayed after class the night before. One was filled with code, a prototype for an anti-harassment filter. The second, a set of sketches for a wearable that would trigger silent video logging when someone shouted, "Show me ID." The third was just 3 words written over and over again in different fonts. We remember, we remember, we remember. He placed all 3 into a folder labeled Fall Showcase Confirm Builders. His phone buzzed. Message from Zoe Trace. It got picked up by the city council. Pilot starts in March. Budget Echoes running on 7 devices across Compton libraries. Also, someone stenciled your name on the basketball court wall again. We'll paint over it. Or not. He replied with a thumbs up emoji in the words, don't paint over it, just spell it right next time. Outside across the street, a new mural was in progress. This one was abstract shapes, layered like overlapping stories. In the center, painted in grayscale, a silhouette of a man walking, hoodie up, no face, no logo, no name. Underneath it in bright yellow spray, you can't delete what echoes him. That afternoon, Tyrone walked to the 43rd Street warehouse, the place where it all began. It was still standing. Still quiet inside, the dust had returned, but the server hum never left. He approached the corner unit, Echo Log Core, one still blinking, still documenting, still synced to 15 forks around the world. He didn't need to check the logs. He knew what it held, the truth, encrypted across continents, mirrored in languages he couldn't even read, but all bearing one immutable line: System author, Hall T, original sequence preserved. He knelt down beside the rack, pulled from his hoodie pocket a USB drive the size of a house key, inserted it, typed a single line into the terminal. The screen flashed, green handoff confirmed. Legacy embedded, tamper resistance absolute. He smiled softly, not with pride, with closure. Back in the hallway, he found the old whiteboard they used during the first Sentinel build. Half-erased math diagrams that made no sense now. But on the side, still untouched, was a line Danny had written when they first got funding. Don't sell out scale-in. He took a photo, then left it, because some messages are better fossilized, not framed. As he stepped out into the street, a teenager in a faded backpack stopped him. Hey, are you the guy? The Sentinel dude? Tyrone tilted his head. Which one? The one who didn't say anything, but still won. He thought about that, then shrugged. I said something. I just said it in code. The kid laughed. That's tight. I built a thing last week that won't let you publish unless you credit every contributor. Then you already won. That night, Tyrone took the long way home. Through alleys and murals, past storefronts still flickering with neon, past silence that once tried to bury him. And somewhere between 81st and Park, he found a bench, sat down, and took out his notebook. He didn't write a speech, didn't sketch a product. He just wrote a sentence. They erased me from their systems, so I built new systems. Then he zipped his hoodie, stood up, and walked on. No spotlight, no applause, just footsteps. Echoing a week after the handoff, Tyrone received a letter. Yes, an actual letter. No return address, stamped in Detroit, folded with care as if it had been carried a long way. Inside, a photo of 4 high school students standing in front of a classroom whiteboard, drawn across it in thick black marker. All code is political, all memory is designed. The caption scrawled on the back read, "We built a student info system that doesn't rank kids. No GPAs, just growth charts. Credits roll every Friday," coded it in Hollang. We called it that. Hope that's okay. He smiled, folded it, placed it in a box labeled proof I was never alone. Across the country, stories like that kept finding him. A food justice app in Baltimore, embedded audio signatures from each team member before launching a municipal ethics dashboard in Sao Paulo. Logged every policy decision alongside an origin reflection, a note naming whose communities had been studied and whose had been ignored. One tool called Silent Origin launched as a browser plugin. Its function was simple. Whenever a user encountered a product without attribution or source transparency, the screen dimmed and a single phrase appeared. Where's the mirror? It was built by 2 teenagers in Johannesburg who never met Tyrone. But when they spoke to a journalist, they said his hoodie made it safe for us to question the light. By now, Tyrone could have capitalized. He could have signed a book deal, spoken at every tech summit, opened his own fund. Instead, he published something else, a PDF 14 pages long, titled Guidelines for Building Systems That Don't Erase, free to download. No email required, Creative Commons license. No logo, page 1 began. If your tool forgets who made it, you built a weapon. The doc was translated into 22 languages in the first month. It got cited in university syllabi, quoted in a human rights report on algorithmic transparency, and yet Tyrone remained off-grid. No interviews, no reposts, no brand partnerships. He answered emails, but only the ones that sounded like building. One day, Danny called first time in weeks. You see the new AI Act that passed in the EU, the one with the attribution clause. Yeah, they used 3 paragraphs from your doc. You're literally policy now, he chuckled. And still no health insurance. We're going to fix that. We already did. They didn't talk much after that. Some friendships don't grow through conversation. They grow through the legacy they keep rebooting. That weekend, he visited his mother's grave, first time in years. The cemetery was quiet, no one else around. He sat on the grass hoodie, unzipped, palms flat against the earth. They almost buried me too, he whispered. But I think you would have liked the kids. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a tablet, opened a gallery. One by one, he scrolled through the systems they'd built, not billion-dollar startups, not viral apps, but tools that remembered, recorded, protected, and refused to shut down when the truth got inconvenient. He left a photo printed in laminate on her headstone. Lyric, Zoe, Jamal, and the others standing in front of the Hall Data Lab wall. Under it, a handwritten caption. This time they get to be the footnotes, too. As he walked away, he noticed something. A young girl sitting near another grave, earbuds and typing furiously on a tablet. He passed her slowly, nodded. She looked up. You the guy from the ethics thing? He shrugged. I used your don't erase doc. Built a consent layer for language models. It asks whose voice is missing before it responds. He blinked. That's brilliant. Thanks. Took your silence model too. Modified it to trigger noise when metadata gets stripped. She went back to typing, didn't ask for a photo, didn't thank him, just kept building. He kept walking, and that's when he knew the hoodie wasn't his anymore. 3 weeks after his visit to the cemetery, Tyrone received an envelope, no postage, no address, just slid under the door sometime in the early morning. Inside, a folded sheet of paper and a flash drive. On the paper, we met your mirror. It made us build our own. We don't know your face, but we know your format. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The screen flickered. Then a simple UI appeared, basic but functional, a tool. It was called Origin Lock. Its purpose. Every time a user tried to clone or fork a project from an open source repository, it would stop them and ask one question. Do you know who wrote the first line? If the answer field was blank, the project wouldn't open. If they lied, it would flag the action and notify a global transparency ledger. If they answered truthfully, the system would display a confirmation message. Proceed, memory acknowledged. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. There it was, a system that taught respect before it allowed replication. Not built by him, but clearly inspired by him. And that more than anything else made him feel something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Safety, not because he was protected, but because now the systems were. That weekend, Hall Data Lab held its final open house for the season. Parents filed in. With folding chairs, siblings watched from the back. Each student presented a small tool they'd built over the term. No prizes, no rankings, just systems telling the truth. One student, Andre, built a micro-archive app that let families document their own oral histories and link them to public record databases. He named it Unredacted. Another, Selena, created a bot that scanned local ordinances and flagged sections that had disproportionately impacted Black neighborhoods. Her project was called Echo Proof. Each student stepped forward and said the same sentence. I am not the footnote, I am the function. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, but Tyrone didn't cry. He just stood in the back. Hoodie zipped arms crossed, letting them have the stage. It was always meant for them. After the event, he slipped out the back. No goodbyes, no farewell speech, just a quiet exit through the alley where murals of code and memory wrapped around brick walls like vines, reclaiming concrete. At the edge of the block, a boy leaned against a fire hydrant, sketching something on a tablet. He looked up. U-Haul, Tyrone paused. Didn't answer. The boy nodded anyway. Yeah, thought so. I'm writing a game where every level you beat reveals the name of a coder who got erased. By the time you win, the whole credits screen is just black and brown names. Tyrone raised an eyebrow. Sounds heavy, the boy smiled. Sounds right. Tyrone gave a small nod. When you launch it, don't forget to put yourself last in the credits. Why last? So no one forgets who made sure everyone else got listed. The boy laughed. Tyrone walked on. He didn't go home. He took a bus across town, found a library he'd never visited, sat by the reference section, opened his laptop, opened a fresh document. At the top, he typed Echo Build V-Well-1, a toolkit for legacy-driven design. Then in smaller font, this is not a manifesto. This is not a warning. This is not a history. This is a doorway. He wrote for hours, not with urgency, but with purpose, as if each word extended a bridge back to someone he'd never meet, but who would read it, understand it, and use it to build forward. Outside rain started falling. Not hard, just enough to tap rhythm on the glass beside him. He closed the laptop, stood up, reached for his hoodie, pulled it on, and smiled at the reflection in the window. Not because he saw himself, but because he saw the outline of 1,000 others walking with him. He stepped outside, hands in his pocket, hood up head high, one step after another, past the shadows that once erased him, past the lights that now bore his echo, not loud, not fast, but permanent. Because in the end, they didn't build a system that remembered he did. And now the hoodie walks on. Tyrone Hall never raised his voice. He raised the standard. While others chased platforms, he built protocols. While they stole his name, he programmed memory. And when they tried to rewrite history, his system already had a backup. He didn't fight for credit. He fought so that the next kid wouldn't have to. Not for applause, not for revenge, but for permanence. Now his hoodie walks not in protest, but in purpose down streets lined with data. He made honest across dashboards that speak his name in whispers. Only truth can carry. This isn't just a win for one man. It's a win for everyone who's ever been cropped out of the photo, left off the slide, cut from the credits, but kept building anyway. Because now the code remembers, and the next system, it starts with their names already locked in. If this story moved you even just a little, here's how you keep it alive. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories. Every episode uncovers a black story behind the hoodie and the system that tried to forget it. Share this story with someone who's ever been underestimated. Comment below, what would you build if no one could erase your name? And don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss the next reflection. Behind every hoodie, there's a black story worth telling. This wasn't just Tyrone's win. It was a system learning how to remember, and that's a future worth coding for.